Hey everybody, welcome back to Crypto Insider. And folks, we have got a massive story breaking today that I think every single XRP holder needs to hear about, because this is genuinely one of the biggest developments we have seen all year for Ripple and for XRP. It doesn't get much bigger than this. Ripple is now fully licensed across the entire European Union, and we need to sit down and really unpack what this means, because this isn't just some small regulatory update buried in a press release. This is the unlock. This is what opens the door for XRP specifically, and for Ripple's entire payments network to be used by banks, financial institutions, corporations, and businesses all across Europe. Right now, only about 8 to 10% of crypto companies operating in the EU are actually fully licensed, and Ripple just became one of them. So let's get into it, because this is a story that's going to keep unfolding for months. Here's the announcement straight from the source. Ripple has received full MiCA crypto asset service provider authorization in Europe, and this approval is dated July 6, 2026. Ripple, which describes itself as the leading provider of blockchain-based enterprise solutions across traditional and digital finance, announced today that it has received authorization of its crypto asset service provider license from Luxembourg's financial regulator. This follows the preliminary approval that was announced back in June of this year. And what this confirms is that Ripple is now fully MiCA compliant, meaning its end-to-end regulated crypto payments products are now available to financial institutions, corporates, and businesses across all 30 countries in the European Economic Area. According to Cassie Craddock, Ripple's managing director for the UK and Europe, this authorization means Ripple is entering the post-transitional MiCA era fully compliant and ready to scale. Now let's talk about why this is such a massive structural move for the company. Ripple has gone from simply preparing for MiCA compliance to being completely and fully licensed to run regulated crypto asset services, including XRP and RLUSD across all 30 EEA countries. And they're doing it through a single regulatory hub based in Luxembourg. For institutions that actually care about compliance, and trust me, the big ones absolutely do. This is the difference between running small pilot projects and running real scalable production-level deployment under MiCA. A CASP license from an EU regulator lets Ripple passport its services across the entire economic area. And when you combine that with Ripple's existing electronic money institution license, the EMI, Ripple can now offer complete end-to-end regulated crypto payments covering on-ramp, exchange, transfer, and off-ramp to banks, fintechs, and corporates through one single integration. What that means in practical terms is huge. European institutions can now use Ripple's infrastructure to move between fiat currency and crypto, access liquidity, and settle payments using digital assets, all without having to stitch together a patchwork of different local licenses or rely on unregulated providers. Ripple now sits in a very small, very exclusive club of firms that hold full MiCA compliant authorization, covering both crypto asset services and e-money payment functions at the EU level. And when you look at the scope of what MiCA's CASP regime actually covers, we're talking about custody, exchange, transfer, and execution of orders involving crypto assets. MiCA also creates a specific bespoke regime for assets that aren't already covered under existing EU financial rules, and Ripple's own language around this focuses heavily on end-to-end regulated crypto payments, moving, storing, exchanging, and managing value. That tells you this license is going to be used first for payments, liquidity, and treasury-type services, rather than something like a retail trading venue. This is institutional first, through and through. And honestly, this reminds me a lot of Ripple's treasury business. And I would not be surprised at all if they end up expanding that across the entire EU now that they have this infrastructure in place. This really does open up XRP's usage at scale in a way we haven't seen before. And if you know anything about how Ripple operates, you know they don't move fast and loose. When Ripple is working towards something, they are usually planning it 6 to 12 months in advance, quietly building partnerships and collaborations behind the scenes. So do not be surprised if we start seeing a wave of announcements coming in quick succession over the next several months. This license is the foundation, and now the building starts. Cassie Craddock actually spoke publicly about this today, and she explained that the main reason we're seeing this kind of adoption happen right now really comes down to regulatory clarity, and how that clarity is giving banks and the largest financial institutions in the world the confidence and the ability to actually offer these services to their own customers. She went on to explain that MiCA here in Europe has really kickstarted this entire momentum. And what we're seeing now is banks essentially racing on a regional basis to launch their own digital asset offerings because their customers are demanding it. It is no longer a nice-to-have feature. It has become a must-have if these banks want to stay competitive in their region. And she made the point that this momentum around regulatory clarity is only going to keep building. Last year alone, Europe saw 250% year-on-year growth from a custody perspective, and that kind of momentum is expected to keep accelerating. Craddock also posted publicly saying that Ripple is now fully licensed in Europe, and that the team is excited to keep building on the incredible momentum of recent months. Monica Long, another Ripple executive, echoed that sentiment, framing this moment as exactly what compliance first looks like, and exactly why European institutions are choosing to build with Ripple. Now, here's something interesting for the history buffs in the audience. This outcome was basically forecasted if you go back and look at the documentation trail. Ripple and XRP are now legally permitted to operate across Europe, and if you trace it back, you can see Ripple has been meeting with market regulators and participants for years to get to this exact point. There are records going back to 2022, then again in 2024, and then more meetings through 2025, including specific sessions discussing the progress of RLUSD issuance in the EU with financial conduct departments. Ripple has been putting in the legwork for years to get to this place, and now we're finally seeing the payoff. The documentation covers MiCA licensing categories for crypto asset issuers, utility tokens, stablecoins, and crypto asset service providers, with other assets like Bitcoin falling into their own separate category. And there is a reasonable case, based on how MiCA classifies things, that XRP falls under the utility token classification, since the token itself is used for things like cross-border payments through infrastructure rather than functioning purely as a currency. Let's talk about the bigger picture here, because MiCA's July 1st cutoff completely transformed Europe into a licensed market almost overnight. It turned what used to be a passporting patchwork into a clean licensed system in a very short window of time, and the stablecoin and compliance lanes are moving just as fast. Reports suggest only around 244 firms were fully approved in time, while somewhere around 1,700 to possibly as many as 3,000 crypto firms had to stop serving EU users altogether. Binance ended up on the wrong side of that line, while companies like Coinbase, Kraken, and OKX picked up what you could call a regulatory premium in the process. Meanwhile, other players in the stablecoin space have been securing their own distribution wins through major institutional partnerships. So while some companies are ready to move forward, others are being forced to shut down their EU operations entirely, and that is exactly the kind of shakeup that creates opportunity for the firms left standing. Think about those numbers for a second, because they are honestly staggering. Over 3,000 crypto firms were operating in the EU before MiCA came into full force, and reportedly only around 280 of them survived this purging process. That is less than 10%, which is an incredible statistic when you really sit with it. And this is exactly the kind of environment that regulations like MiCA in Europe or the Payment Services Act in Singapore are designed to create. They offer clear legal pathways for companies willing to actually engage with regulators. And that clarity is directly encouraging Ripple's expansion into these highly developed jurisdictions. There was also coverage today specifically noting that this milestone could directly benefit XRP, since Ripple's CASP license, when combined with its existing EMI license, will allow European banks, fintechs, and corporations to access Ripple's entire crypto asset and stablecoin payments infrastructure, letting them collect, exchange, and pay out through one single integration for the very first time. Alongside its EU EMI license, this CASP approval places Ripple among only a handful of digital asset service providers with full MiCA authorization, and it adds to Ripple's already massive global portfolio of more than 75 regulatory licenses worldwide. The RLUSD stablecoin, along with XRP-powered Ripple solutions, spans global payments, custody, liquidity, and treasury management, and this new license will let Ripple expand those crypto asset services to financial institutions and businesses across all 30 countries in the region. And here is the real benefit hiding underneath all of this. Think about how many companies are simply not regulated at this point and now have to stop operating entirely. If those companies had infrastructure or existing clients, those clients still need somewhere to go, whether they are institutional clients or retail clients. They need proper, compliant infrastructure, and that is exactly where Ripple is positioned to step in. I think we are going to see a steady stream of announcements from Ripple over the coming months as this plays out. The crypto community has been buzzing about this all day, and one popular take going around really captures the sentiment well. Ripple just got fully approved to operate across Europe under MiCA, which is essentially the new crypto law framework for the entire European Economic Area. That means Ripple can now legally offer crypto payment services across 30 countries under one single unified regulatory system. And here's the thing, banks and large institutions do not want to touch companies that might get shut down tomorrow. They want regulated partners they can trust for the long haul. This single move positions Ripple as one of the safest and most trusted companies in the entire industry. While a lot of crypto companies spent years actively avoiding regulation, Ripple spent those same years building relationships with regulators instead. And that patience is exactly why they are now one of the few companies with full MiCA approval, while even massive exchanges like Binance are still struggling with parts of Europe. People used to think XRP holders were crazy for sitting through years of uncertainty and frustration, but the whole thesis from the beginning was always that regulation would eventually clear out the weaker projects and leave only a handful of serious players standing. And now we are watching that thesis play out in real time. Ripple has the licenses. XRP powers the liquidity. RLUSD connects the rails. The XRP ledger is getting more attention than ever, and institutions are finally getting the regulatory clarity they have been waiting for. This is what a genuine utility-driven season looks like before the broader public even notices it happening. Every major outlet is picking up this story right now, and honestly, that alone tells you how significant this development really is. This is not hype for the sake of hype, this is a structural shift in how European finance can interact with digital assets. So let's have a real conversation about what this actually means going forward. Institutions, banks, and companies can only work with fully regulated, fully compliant infrastructure providers, and now Ripple has essentially everything it needs in place. There isn't some bigger milestone sitting above this that Ripple still has to chase. This single license unlocks nearly everything. Whether we're talking about the largest banks and financial institutions in Europe or the largest corporations, it genuinely does not matter which category they fall into, because they can now pick up the phone and get everything they need from one single infrastructure provider. Think about what that actually solves. If you need payment rails, an on-ramp or off-ramp, stablecoin access, tokenization, or cross-border settlement, you would normally have to go find separate companies for each one of those pieces. Now imagine having to juggle 4 or 5 different vendors handling all of that. And what happens if even one of them goes down or loses its license? Consolidating all of that under one regulated provider is exactly where the real advantage comes from, and that is precisely the position Ripple has just put itself in. There is going to be a lot more coming out of this story, and I am genuinely looking forward to covering every bit of it with you as it develops. Make sure you are subscribed and following along, because I will be bringing you every single update as this unfolds over the coming weeks and months. I know licensing news doesn't always sound like the most thrilling topic on its surface, but this is exactly where it all starts. And this groundwork is what eventually leads to the bigger, more exciting developments down the road. Keep an eye on partnership announcements, expanded treasury deals, and further institutional adoption across Europe, because based on Ripple's usual playbook, those things tend to follow a major licensing win like this fairly quickly. As always, I really appreciate every one of you tuning in and being part of this community. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you think this means for XRP and Ripple going forward. Share this video with anyone who needs to see it, and I will see you in the next one.